Warren Bates, everybody. Good evening. My name is David Levy. Welcome to True Theater. We are so excited. Thank you. Thank you. We are thrilled to be doing this once again in person in downtown Cincinnati's beautifully restored Memorial Hall. Yeah. Tell you, the staff, the tech crew, the administration here has done a great job making us feel like family and making our shows run extremely smoothly. Big shout out to everybody at Memorial Hall. Thank you all so much. I am one of the founders of True Theater, and I am just wondering, is this anybody's first True Theater show? I need an audible. Yeah, oh, that is so great. I'm so excited for you. I'm excited for everybody. This is our 12th season. By the end of this season, we'll have produced over 60 shows featuring over 300 different stories from nearly that many individual storytellers. Of course, every show is like a baby of ours, but I frequently find myself thinking about that very first show, October 25th, 2010. Nobody had ever heard of us yet. To find the storytellers for that show, my friend and co-founder Jeff Groh and I had to ask friends. And without skipping a beat, everyone we asked said, yeah, we'll do it. They had no idea what it was like at the time to just sort of open yourself up and be vulnerable on stage. They just trusted that we were going to create an environment that would make them comfortable and provide an audience that would appreciate what they were doing. And I'm sad to say that in the past month, two of those storytellers, friends of ours, passed away. Amber Lieb had just moved away from Cincinnati with her then future husband, Kirk, and they came all the way back to Cincinnati to do the show. And Tim Stankin was already telling his story to audiences 10 times as large as the ones that we offered him, and he was just like, whatever you need, Dave. Both of them were so generous, told such great stories that night, and will be missed terribly. Amber Lieb and Tim Stankin. Thank you. I hope some of you had a good time out there playing Pin the Tie on the Dad before the show. If you didn't get a chance to do that, you'll still be able to do it at intermission. Everybody's a winner, I think. You know, it's pretty impossible to lose, and it looked like a lot of fun. I want you to know that all of the ties that that are being used there, as well as ties and professional clothing for use that some of you may have brought if you got the news that we were doing this, are all going to be donated after the show to the Cincinnati Youth Collaborative. We just heard about this and thought it would be a great thing to do. I got to tell you, they unite volunteers, school districts, and local businesses to create this network of support for students. And their mission is that no vulnerable child or young adult, should not have an opportunity for success, whether in education, in a career, or in life. And they've got this really wonderful mission. We're happy to be able to make a donation to them and to anybody that got the word and brought any professional clothing for use and donated it there. We're so grateful to you. Thank you so much. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Cincinnati Youth Collaborative. Yeah, so shout out to those guys. Yeah. There also happens to be a cocktail named after the show tonight. The Daddy-O is being sold in the house tonight. Apparently it's bourbon and ginger ale and lime. Sounds good to me. You might find me at the bar at intermission getting one. I want to give a special shout out to Norse Media here. This is a student-staffed production house at Northern Kentucky University's electronic media department that works all over the place and is working for us right now and generously is sponsoring the rental of all the equipment that they need to stream the show tonight. So thank you so much for that. Emma, Beth, and Chris, really grateful for that. Folks, every show at True Theater has a theme. Tonight the theme is dads. I'm super excited because I haven't seen my dad in person since before the world shut down. And next week, I'm going to get to travel and see him finally in person again. Yeah, I'm super stoked. Dad, if you're watching, this one's for you. I can't wait to see you. You know, we like to say at True Theater that everybody has a story to share, and the only difference between strangers and friends is the sharing of that story. And tonight, you're going to make 6 new friends. I'd like to introduce you to the first one now. He has spent 42 years in social work and education in everything from line work to executive positions. Focusing on family counseling and addictions. He then retired, went back to school, got a degree in photography, and now runs his own business. It's never too late, kids. His photography has appeared in several LGBTQIA+ publications, has been exhibited in several galleries around time, and has earned him some awards. He says he's been fortunate to have been speaking his truth since the mid-'70s, and is currently doing so as a board member of Buckeye Flame, a program committee member at Caracol, and the program chair for Cincinnati Black Pride. And of course, he's here tonight to speak even some more truth. Please welcome Ron Clemons.
I'm never really sure how to describe my relationship with my dad. Sometimes I say transitory, sometimes I say always changing, but the one thing that I do know that in the 63 years that he and I shared this planet together, our relationship was in a constant state of evolving. The first 17 years were really difficult. I'm not sure if he had a death wish out for me or not. Maybe it was because he was the firstborn and had to take care of his 5 younger siblings due to his dad's diabetic blindness and gambling problem, or maybe it was because he was the firstborn of the generation that migrated north from the inequities and the injustices of the Jim Crow South. I don't know. We never really talked about it. I'm kind of spitballing here, but all I know is that my penchant for thinking for myself and my willingness to tell him no was the bane of his existence. I remember being 4 years old. We were sitting in our living room watching probably The Rifleman, and there was something on the other side of the room that I wanted to get, and I got up to go on the other side of the room, and he told me not to walk in front of the TV set. Well, I'm 4, so the world revolves around me. And what I wanted was certainly more important than whatever dramatic thing was happening on the television, so I compromised, and I just scurried across the room in front of the TV set. Now, I'm sure you all have seen those movies where everybody is at the beach and having a good time, and they show the scene where somewhere off in the distance there's an underground earthquake. And nobody on the beach knows that the earthquake has happened, but they see the water being pulled away from the beach and trying to figure out what was going on. That was kind of the moment I had when I saw my dad get up out of his chair, walk across the room. He picked me up and he threw me across the room where I landed behind the couch. My mother and my brother thought that that was pretty funny, but it set the tone for our relationship for the next 20 years. Mom worked outside of the home, and sometimes she had to work at night, so that meant that my brother and I had to accompany my dad on his sports outings, which at the time were bowling and softball. Now, I hated sports, and I hated my dad, so these outings were particularly excruciating. My escape was to go explore. Sometimes I would explore the parks in my hometown where they played softball, and if we were in one of the little country towns around Mansfield, I would go off in the woods and play in the woods or play in the creek, but I always had to be back on time. Sometimes I made it back on time, sometimes I didn't. And when I didn't, those made for some pretty long car rides home. And there was one time that I was particularly really late where he had to wait for me and all his teammates had left. The car ride was really long that time, and when I got home, I got beat. The next day, I went up to my grandmother's house, his mother, and she wanted to know what was wrong with me. I guess she could tell something was up when I walked in the door. And I did not want to tell her, but she kept pushing me, so I finally told her what had happened. She walked over to her phone, she called her house, she asked to speak to her son. And she told my dad that if he ever put his hands on me again, she would make sure that he was arrested and he went to jail. Now, lest you think that everything in my household was terrible and I really hated to be around my dad all the time, that's not the case. The Ohio State Reformatory, star of the Shawshank Redemption, is in my hometown. And at that time, it had many working parts, and one of the parts was the Honors Farm. And it is exactly what it sounded like. The Honors Farm was a farm where they had cows, they had pigs, they had chickens, they had gardens, they had flowers, they had a kitchen, and basically, they provided the food for the reformatory, but also for some of the surrounding neighborhoods when they would set up their fruit and vegetable stands in the summertime. But the city always had a softball tournament every year with the inmates at the Honors Farm, and my dad's softball team was part of that league, and so we would go out there. It was a good time. It was a lot of fun, a lot of kids, and it was always interesting to see Dad in that environment because he was much more relaxed when he interacted with the inmates and his teammates, and it was very different than what he was like when he was at home. Bowling was the same thing. I could go to the bowling alley, and my escape there was I could go kiddie bowl, I could go hang out in the game room and play pinball, which I actually love pinball, or hang out in the snack bar. But those times when I wasn't able to do that and watching my dad bowl, he was so much more relaxed and so much more fun to be around because he was just having a good time. On the day of his funeral, his best friend, in giving remarks, told the story of how my dad was responsible for creating the Black Bowling League in Mansfield, and he was also responsible for getting the bowling alley integrated where the Black Bowling League started to bowl, and the bowling league is still going on to this day. And my brother and I kind of looked at each other, and he said, "Did you know any of this?" And it's like, no, Dad had never talked about that. After college, I moved to Cincinnati. I had a job, I had a car, I had an apartment, I'd come out of the closet, I was a free queer. And I was talking to my dad one day on the phone, and he called me a liar. And it just pissed me off. That was a trigger, because when my dad would call me a liar when I was living at home, that usually led to being berated, and sometimes the berating led to being hit. So I was not having any of that. Now, some of you will understand what I'm about to tell you. You know the transcendent, cathartic experience of being able to slam the receiver down on a rotary phone and hearing the ping go off on the ringer because you slammed it down so hard. That's exactly what I did to my dad, except I took it one step further. I cussed him out first, and then I hung up on him. If you're going to continue to talk to me like that, you can fuck off and stay the hell out of my life, you son of a bitch. Bam! Ping. I felt so exuberant and so excited. It's like I finally told that son of a bitch off, yay me, yay me, yay me. And after about 5 seconds, it sunk in what I'd actually just done. It's like, oh my God, I just hung up on my father. Not only did I hang up on my father, I cussed him out. What am I going to do? And my mom told me later that he sat at the table and he was really upset that I'd hung up on him. And I knew that I was going to have a conversation with him before I ever went back to Mansfield. And there was an event coming up. My dad belonged to a sportsman's club that he founded, and every summer they had a fish fry. And as a child of one of the founders, I was expected to be there. But I also knew that my dad and I would have to have a conversation, not only before I went to this fish fry, but before I even stepped foot in the boundaries of Mansfield. So I called him up, and I said, "Dad, I apologize to you for how I said it, but I meant every word that I said." And it was the first time in our relationship that I heard forgiveness in his voice when he apologized for his part in that conversation. Now, like I said, about that same time, I'd come out of the closet, and I shared that news with my mother, but she told me not to tell my dad. Now, again, I was just out of the closet baby gay, not knowing all the nuances here. So I really didn't think anything about it. So a few years later, I had a boyfriend, and I wanted to bring him to my parents for Thanksgiving. And my mom was not having any of that. And I told her that if he could not come, neither one of us were going to be there for Thanksgiving. And she decided to tell me that she was going to tell my father that I'm gay. And I know my queer siblings are out there saying, oh, no, she didn't. Oh, yeah, she did. She did do that. And I hung up the phone. I packed a bag. I told my boyfriend I was going to be gone for a couple days, got in the car, drove the 3 hours to Mansfield, didn't tell them that I was coming, walked in the kitchen door, walked past my mother. She's like, what are you doing here? I'm here to talk to my dad. And I went into the TV room where he was sitting watching his afternoon soap opera, Bowling for Dollars. And I sat on the couch across from him, and he was in his Barca lounger, and I sat down and I said, Dad, I'm gay. And what seemed like an hour, which was actually probably only a couple minutes, he turned around, he looked me in the face, and he said, the only thing I know for sure is 2 + 2 = 4. And I just sat there and thought, what are you talking about? I'm sitting there thinking, I just told you that I'm gay, and 2 + 2 = 4? What does that mean? And I sat there for a couple more minutes waiting for something else, but it never came. So I got up, went into the kitchen, had the more important conversation with my mother, and kept thinking, what happened? What was that? What does that even mean? As these things go, I broke up with that boyfriend, and it was my dad who called me up to make sure that I was doing okay and to find out if I needed anything. And a few years later, I had gone to the Gay March on Washington, 1993 March on Washington, and my mom told me that my dad turned on the TV and sat from Thursday afternoon until Sunday evening watching CNN, hoping to get a glimpse of me on television. And in all the interactions we've had over the years, that is the one that has meant the most to me. Years later, he began to slip away into dementia. And it was very unsettling to see someone who was so stoic in how he interacted with the world become so apologetic about things, behaviors and things that he really had no control over. And as I sat with him on what I knew was going to be his last night on earth, I realized that there were conversations that he and I were never going to have, and there were questions that would never be answered. Why were you so mean to me as a child? Why did you sit from Thursday until Sunday hoping to get a glimpse of me on CNN? And the biggest question is, what the hell does all I know is 2 + 2 = 4 mean? I still don't have an answer to that question. I held his hand and I said the things I needed to say to him. They say the dying can hear what's going on around them, even though they're between worlds. And my last words to my dad were that I was glad that death was close for him because he would be free of the ravages of this disease, and on some level, I would be free also, that I loved him, and that I'm glad that he was my dad. Our final transition, at least for me, is that I now understand that I can grant him some humanity, I can forgive him for his imperfections, and that both of us, in spite of being flawed, deserve love.
One more time for Ron Clemons. Our next storyteller is no stranger to True Theater audiences who've been around for a while. Many years ago at True Beauty, she shared the story about her childhood and how even though her family had little, her mother never let them feel like they were poor. At True Addiction, we learned that she quit smoking in order to hold up her end of a deal she made with God. And in our first maybe season here at Memorial Hall at True Blue, she shared a story about the true blue man in her life, Maureen, and her husband, Michael. And at years old, we assume she has many more stories than this stage can hold, and we're so grateful to her for bringing us another one. Please welcome Joan Hoxsey.
Think of a better gig than having two handsome men be at your... Yay! My husband Michael and I were married for 58 years. As I looked around the room tonight before I came up here, I saw people that weren't even alive when we got married. But we were really two kids, in a sense. I was a freshman at Seattle University, and he was a junior, but he had spent several years in the Marine Corps before he came back to school. I think one of the things when I look at that period of time that drew me to Michael was his love of family. He really liked his mom and dad. His dad was a doctor, one of four left in this little eastern Washington town when World War II started. There had been 44 before that. He really, in a sense, worked himself to death. Michael always used to say, I hope I can be as good a father as my dad. And I knew that was probably true because his dad had been his caretaker and his advocate when he had rheumatic fever and all of the various symptoms that go along with that and the difficulties that go along with that. He had Sydenham's chorea and couldn't talk for a year. I sometimes wished when we were married that never mind. But I really was drawn to Michael because he had this great family, and that was really a part of what I wanted. I hadn't had a very good relationship with my father. My father was a person who couldn't take any kind of conflict, it seems to me, when I look back at it, and was gone for almost 2 years without my mother knowing where he was when she had 4 children, one of whom was a baby Mary Therese, and she died while my dad was gone. Her mother also passed away while my dad was gone. And he was gone during my childhood. It's hard to think of myself as a reconciliation baby, but I was, I guess. He had been gone and came back, and I'm the result. Isn't that great? I wouldn't be here tonight after 58 years or any time other than that. But Michael and I married, and we're very excited about being married. We did a lot of work in the first years that we were married on our marriage, and made a marriage encounter and several marriage enrichment opportunities that we took advantage of, and we even started a marriage enrichment group ourselves. So when 1979 or 78 came along, and there was an opportunity, we thought, to learn more about family ministry and family dynamics and ministry itself, we decided to go back to graduate school. It's Seattle. We were living in California. And we knew it'd be really, really tough for us to do that, just to pick up, and move off to Seattle. But we knew it'd be really hard for our kids. But they all agreed that it was worth taking the chance and that we should try. So Off to Seattle we went again, packed up our things from Lancaster, sold our house, and went back to school. And we had this idea that we'd be hired someplace, and I think we really thought the Northwest, that someplace in the Seattle area or Portland area we would be hired as family life ministers, because we knew the year of the family was being declared by the Catholic Church for 1980. That didn't happen. And so here we were, what are we going to do? And we got an offer for a job in exactly what we wanted to do, be the directors of the Office of Marriage and Family Ministry in Youngstown, Ohio. I didn't know where Youngstown, Ohio was, and neither did Michael. But we came off from Seattle to Youngstown. I thought, to tell you the truth, that it was Johnstown, is that it? Where they'd had a fire one time or something. I just didn't know anything about where we were. So if I felt that way, I was sure that the kids felt that way, that it was a very hard transition for them. Especially Michael, who had spent, young Michael, son Michael, he'd spent the first 2 years of high school in California, the third year, his junior year, in Seattle, and now he was going to spend his senior year in Warren, Ohio, where he didn't even know where it was. But he's a really likable kid and a very friendly guy, and so within a very short period of time, he was pretty well integrated into that school and had some best friends. One of them was Rick, the other was Gordon, and Rick had a girlfriend, Vicky. Vic and Rick, I always thought that was funny. And Gordon and Tammy. And so for the senior year, it seemed like they were pretty much a fivesome, that Michael found a lot of kids that he was enjoying, and they liked the same music together, and so it was a good school year until it came time for junior senior prom. And I thought, gosh, this is going to be kind of hard for Michael. He's not been really interested in any of the girls. Shows you how much I knew about my own child, because he had a secret crush, and the crush was on Vicky, of Mick and Vicky, or Rick and Vicky, or somebody and Ricky. But Rick and Vicky, and a few days, fortunate for Michael, he thought, before the prom, Rick and Vicky had a falling out, and they broke up. And Michael came to me very excited, and he said, "Mom, do you think it'd be okay if I asked Vicky to the prom?" And I said, "Well, be sure to ask Ricky. That is the right name, right? Rick, the boyfriend, because you don't want to jeopardize your friendship with him." And so he did. He went to talk to Rick, and Rick said, "That's fine." I think he probably was a little relieved that he knew who she might be going to the prom with, and that he could give a few instructions beforehand. I don't know whether that happened or not. But anyway, we had a little party before the prom, and Michael went off like, he was on cloud nine. Well, that didn't last very long, because a few days after the prom, Rick and Vicky got back together. And Michael was absolutely crestfallen. I mean, he really was smitten, and he thought he had a future with Vicky, which he didn't have. So the Friday after the prom, he came to me and he said, "Mom, a bunch of us are going over to Rick's house, and we're going to play music, and I'll be in by curfew." He always had a curfew, and he said, "But I'll be in before then probably, because we're not going to do much tonight." So I thought, I was sort of proud. I thought, gosh, look how my kid came through this. And he was my kid at that point. Took, credit for all the good stuff and denied all the bad stuff. But about 9 o'clock, the phone rang. And I answered the phone, and hello? Is this Mrs. Hoxsey? And they all called us Mr. and Mrs. Hoxsey. Is this Mrs. Hoxsey? I said, yes, it is. He said, well, and I don't remember now who it was. He said, I don't know why I'm calling you. He said, I sure as heck wouldn't be calling my mother, and I sure wouldn't call my dad if I was in Michael's shape. I thought, what's the matter? What's the matter? What happened? And he said, he's not been in an accident or anything, but he's in pretty bad shape. He's had a lot to drink. What an understatement. And he keeps saying, call my dad. He'll know what to do. I don't know why I'm calling, but I'm calling because Michael says, call my dad. Well, Michael heard that, and he was out in the driveway before I hung up the phone, I think. Rick lived a couple of blocks from where we were, and Michael went to pick him up, and I came home. Now, in the meantime, I'm in the den, and I'm thinking about all this. Kid told me we was going to go play music tonight, and what's he doing? He's drinking. Terrible, terrible. So he came in, and I'm sitting in the den, and he came over next to the chair, and he knelt down, and he said, oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened, Mom, but I felt so bad. I thought maybe a drink or two. A drink or two? And he said, but I thought it would help. I said, Michael, I will talk with you in the morning. Go to bed. And I'm so angry. Well, by this time, Michael had come in from my dad, Michael, had come in from the car, and he's standing in the threshold of the den, and he said to Michael, come on, Michael, let's go upstairs. And they went upstairs, and I didn't know for years what happened in that period of time that he was upstairs with that Dad Michael and son Michael were together. But evidently, Dad Michael helped son Michael get out of his clothes. And he was just getting him into the shower, and he thought, I can't put this boy in the shower, this kid into the shower. He's too unsteady. He can't go by himself. So he kicked off his shoes and got in with him. I want to sit here and cry. I was so proud when Michael, many years later, told me, he said, you know what happened that night? And I should have known sooner than that, because one of these kids that had called. He said, is Mr. Hoxsey there? I said, sure. He got on the phone. He was buying a car. He wanted Mr. Hoxsey to come with him. I wonder why. Wasn't very long, and another kid called, and he had broken up with his girlfriend. He wanted to know if he could come and see Mr. Hoxsey. Could Mr. Hoxsey talk to him? Another kid was getting ready for college. Suddenly, Dad Michael was very, very popular. And I thought back at the time, and I think back about it tonight, he was more than even his father was. He was a real dad. Thank you.
One more time for Joan. All right. Be right with you. I forget what I'm turning here. Got loosened it up. All right. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the show so far, especially you first-timers who didn't know what to expect. Those of you watching from home, I hope you're enjoying it too. The comfort of your own home watching for free. If you feel like, no pressure, but if you feel like paying for a ticket tonight, there's two easy ways you can make a donation to True Theater. You can go to our website, I think, truetheater.org/donate, or go to the bottom of our homepage. There's the donate button there. Very self-explanatory. Remember, we spell theater the fancy way, ending in R-E. Or you could text the code TRUE12, TRUE12, no space, to the number 44321. You get a link back, and then you follow that. It's self-explanatory. Seriously, every little bit helps. We really appreciate it. No donation is too small, or as a friend of mine likes to say, no donation is too large. Test us. We really appreciate it. Hey, our third storyteller tonight, and then we're going to take a quick intermission. Our third storyteller tonight was born in New York, but raised in Cincinnati. He is an Army veteran and a rising executive at Paycor. When he's not spending his time staring at a computer screen, he's often with his family, his wife Megan, and their two rambunctious sons, his words, that they call the raccoons. Or playing with a cover band with several of his childhood friends, singing, playing guitar, piano. He also likes to volunteer his time, helping veterans assimilate back into society, and as an assistant coach at Cincinnati United. He's a terrific guy. I'd love for you to give him a big, hearty welcome. Please welcome Mike Perry.
So when I was 6 years old, my dad left, and I haven't seen him or heard from him since. And now I'm a dad myself. I have two boys, as you heard, Jack and William. And my oldest son, Jack, well, he's 6 years old now, the same age I was when my dad left me. And I find myself reflecting, especially recently, on what it means to be a true dad. Because I feel like, when they were younger, when we were going through, the diapers phase, the sleepless nights, the feedings, it was a little bit simpler. It was hard work, don't get me wrong, but as they get older, they start to ask more heavier-hitting existential questions. And with my son, Jack, it always happens the same way. It's right before bedtime, and he looks up at me and says, "Dad, can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Sure." It's like 2 minutes before bed, of course. "What? You can ask me anything, buddy. What's up?" He's like, "What are butterflies made out of?" Like, or what is the meaning of truth? I don't know. Sometimes they're a little bit heavier, though. Questions like, "Hey, whatever happened to your dad? Why isn't he around anymore? And what do you mean he left?" You see, I feel like as parents, you run into these questions almost accidentally, and you don't really know what to say or do when you're confronted with them. So when I don't know what to do, I grab them and I hold them tight, and I say, "You're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you." And it's become somewhat of a catchphrase in our house, because I can see him when he asks these questions. He's doing that like mental calculus that 6-year-olds will do. And he's realizing that, well, if my dad had a dad that left, there's some mathematical possibility that he could leave me too. And like I said, you don't really know what to do when you're faced with these questions, so you have to reflect on what you know. And in my case, I wonder sometimes, like, if I feel this way, this uncertainty, this hesitation about being a dad and if I'm doing it right, I wonder what my mom felt, having to raise 2 kids on her own without the help of my dad at all. You see, in the years leading up to my dad's departure, it was a very volatile time. He was a drug addict, he was a drunk, and a very violent person. And when he did finally leave for good, he left our family financially bankrupt and emotionally broken. And my mom didn't know what to do. She had to mobilize beyond the fear. The traditional roles or the idea of like traditional mother and father went completely out the window, and it was now a matter of survival. So we moved back in with my grandparents. My mom went back to college, and not only did she graduated top of her class with a degree in accounting. And then upon graduation, she got a job in this random Midwestern city called Cincinnati as a bookkeeper, which is very different from where she grew up outside of Queens on Long Island in New York. And in those earlier years, money was always tight. I remember having this concept of there being a cloud of anxiety over our heads every day with money. My mom had to budget everything week to week down to the last penny. And she did all of this to keep food on the table and a roof over her head, which she did without fail. But there were times when it got kind of weird, where like some nights our power would get shut off and didn't know why. Or there's a time at the grocery store where they didn't accept her check that she was trying to use to pay for groceries, because I guess we didn't have the cash on us at the time, and we had to leave our groceries there and go home empty-handed. And I remember my mom crying over it. She was really, really torn up by it. And I have this image of my mother sitting at the kitchen table, laboring over a pile of bills and smoking a Newport cigarette, of all things. And I was 6. I was a little kid at the time, and I asked her once, I said, "Mom, are we poor?" And my mom, never mind you, she's from New York and does not mince words if you've ever met her. Sorry, Mom. And she turns to me and says, "Michael, we are not poor. We're broke." And I came to this realization that if something is broke, you can fix it. It can be repaired. And my mom always had this excellent job of making very serious situations seem a little lighter, temporary almost. Like we were going to get through it. We just had to stick with it and keep going one day at a time. See, my mom, she was doing it on her own, so she had to play the role of both mother and father. So the traditional roles or conversations you expect to have as a son with your dad were a little bit different in our house. For instance, car repair. You imagine your father taking you into the garage and teaching you how to take apart an engine and rebuild it and turning wrenches and bonding over that shared experience. But with our family, it was different. My mom had this old car. It was an 87 Chrysler New Yorker. It was tan. And it looked like, candidly, a tank that was decommissioned after World War II. The thing was an absolute beast. And we're driving down the road one day, going to work and school. She was dropping us off. And all of a sudden, we heard a loud bang and metal dragging from the back of the car. No idea what it was. It turns out the muffler fell off, and it was dragging behind the car. My mom pulls over and assesses the situation, and from somewhere, I have no idea where she pulled it, but she found a piece of rope and tied the muffler back onto the frame of the car in the middle of winter. And mind you, my mom is like this tall. She's not very big. So she's climbing this massive car, tying it back on. And this kept happening every few days or so, for weeks it seemed, because we couldn't afford to get the car fixed. So it got to the point where we'd be driving and you'd hear a bang, drag, and my sister would be, "Mom, the muffler." She'd pull over, find her trusty rope, and tie the muffler back on and keep on driving. Now, I can't drive anywhere without some sort of rope or bungee cord in the back of my car. It's like a conditioned response at this point. Another example is the infamous sex talk. And when we were kids, we used to watch a lot of television. And one show we used to love watching was Seventh Heaven. And in the show, if you recall, there was the good Reverend Father and his bushel of kids, and he had his oldest son. And in one episode, he pulls his son aside and has a very serious, somber, heartfelt conversation with him about the merits of safe sex. And sure enough, right after it cut to commercial, a commercial comes on, and it says, "Parents, make sure you're talking to your kids about safe sex." And I sheepishly look up, and I catch her eyes, and I'm like, damn it. And she looks at me, and with the ruthless pragmatism of a single mother, turns to me and says, "Michael, if you get a girl pregnant, your life is over." It's like, roger that, Now I can't wait to have that conversation with my boys when they're old enough. Another lesson was around mentorship and around dealing with complex emotions. See, growing up, I had a lot of harbored resentment and frustration and anger toward the situation that I was in. And I grew envious of those that grew up in, quote, normal families with their dad in the picture every day. And how it manifested itself was through fighting. I fought all the time. From the 1st grade to the 7th grade, I was suspended at least once or twice a year from school for fighting, to the point where I almost got expelled But my principal told me, hey, you got to join wrestling to not get expelled. You got to find a creative outlet for all this excess energy that you have. My mom, realizing that me and my sister were going through our own versions of this, she'd send us up to live with my grandparents during the summertime. And those were the golden summers of my youth. To paint a picture, my grandparents, they met and they were childhood sweethearts. My grandpa was drafted in the Korean War. And after the war, he came back, got his degree in physics, and then went on to become an electrician, and worked his way on to become a journeyman electrician, the highest rated electrician you could be, working in Manhattan, the center of the world at the time, on the biggest buildings you'd ever seen. And he was a true Renaissance man. He played multiple instruments. He could dance like Fred Astaire. And, he was the first positive male role model in my life. And one day, he took me to visit this place called West Point. I didn't really know what it was at the time or have any preconceived notions about what it was going to be like, but he was a history buff, and he loved the idea of West Point and what it meant. And we went there, and I saw all of these cadets in their beautiful uniforms, and their brass buttons. And I remember thinking, these cadets could be from anywhere, and you couldn't tell the difference. And I knew that they were doing something truly remarkable, and that I wanted to be a part of it too. So I came home, and I had this goal. This was now 8th grade, and I'm driving to school with my mom because I was suspended from the bus for fighting. And we're on our way to school, and I end up getting up the courage to tell my mom. I said, Mom, I really want to go to West Point. Do you think I have any shot of getting in? And she looks at me, and she says, Michael, you have absolutely no shot of getting into West Point unless you get your shit together. The rest of the car ride was completely silent. I remember thinking I wanted my mom to be the cheerleader, the one to tell me, like, you can set your mind and do whatever you want in this world, and you can achieve it if you set your mind to it. But instead, what she gave me was a piece of rope. She told me exactly what I needed to hear at the exact right time. And so, I got my shit together. I got my grades turned around. I stopped walking with this chip on my shoulder that made me want to fight everybody I saw. And I joined all the wrestling sports clubs I could find to get out that excess energy, as the principal called it. And when I got to West Point, believe it or not, what I found out was that my best friends that I met there, my closest friends, the vast majority of them came from broken families of their own versions. Some had dads that stayed in the picture, but due to perhaps a nasty divorce, they were completely estranged from their family. I had another close friend of mine whose dad was a drug dealer and destroyed many of the relationships in their family by sticking around. And I came away with two distinct realizations once I got there. One, I had a pretty damn good childhood. And what my mom was able to provide was always more than enough. And two, had my dad stuck around, I would have been a different person, perhaps. I would have maybe ended up where I am today, but maybe there would have been scar tissue that wouldn't have had a chance to heal. And then I came away with the realization that I always did have a true dad. I had two true dads. And so my grandpa, or when I go back to my son, when he asked me these questions about my father and, why isn't he around and what do you mean by that? I tell him, look, Jack, I'm the father I am today, not because of the father that I didn't have, but I'm the man I am today because of the true dads that raised me. My mom, my grandpa. And then I hold him, I grab him, squeeze him nice and tight. And I say, you're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you. And your mom, she's stuck with both of us.
One more time for Mike. Thank you, Mike. Folks, we're going to take a quick 15-minute intermission. If you're here in the house with us, why don't you play some Pin the Tie on the Dad, maybe have a Daddy-O drink at the bar. If you're at home, stretch your legs, use the bathroom, maybe make a donation to True Theater, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Thanks a lot. On with the show, our next storyteller tonight. She is the artistic director of Liberty Exhibition Hall and founder of Clifton Performance Theater and Kids Act Out. She believes, as do I, storytelling has a higher purpose. She says it aligns our history and lets us find common ground with each other. Her story is certainly evidence of that tonight. Please welcome Carol Brammer.
My father was a man of few words, and though I believe he cared a great deal about my upbringing, his parental advice generally came in the form of short and cryptic sentences. It was a little bit like being raised by Yoda. And I would walk away from these encounters with him knowing that what he had to say to me was probably really important piece of developmental advice, but it was going to be up to me to actually fill in the blanks. It was an exercise in imagination. And I can thank him for my early love of storytelling because very often I was making up what he didn't say or wouldn't say. Now this arrangement he and I had, well, it went pretty well. I was a pretty good kid. But on occasion, my interpretation of what he was trying to tell me would cause something to go awry. For example, in the second grade, I changed schools mid-year, and my father accompanied me to the new school, took me into my new classroom, got down on his knees and looked me in the eyes, adjusted my braids, and said, "Carol, if a boy tries to kiss you, kick him in the knee." Okay. So my report card comes home like 3 weeks later, and in that box under conduct, it says, "Carol is too rough with the boys." I guess in my attempt to be an obedient child and take care of myself, I started kicking all the boys before they could get close enough to kiss me. Now don't worry, I have since then abandoned that behavior. My father's name was Devon Duke Sloan, and he was part of a unique people group called Melungeons. They mainly, at the time of his young life, lived in the northeastern part of Florida and the southeastern part of Georgia and Alabama. They were triracial, they are triracial, and it simply meant they were people who married, who generally were African or Native American, French or Spanish. Historians believe that they were concentrated in that part of what we now know as northern Florida because it was originally governed by Spain hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And the Queen of Spain at the time allowed integrated marriage. She allowed it with two rules, apparently. One, you had to be Catholic or become Catholic, and two, you had to serve in the Queen's military. And you know, I guess that's not a bad price to pay for getting to love who you love. And if this is true, well then, you know, God save the Queen of Spain for being so progressive before her time. So my father's parents were a result of this culture and this integrated marriage. His father, Moses, was triracial, and his mother was full-blood Seminole Indian. And they lived in Plant City, Florida, as peanut farmers with 14 children. Among them were my father and his twin sister, Yvonne. And I've always imagined this to be kind of idyllic, you know, to have that many siblings, and at the least, full of culture and community and family. But at the age of 5, my father's mother died. And his father could not financially or physically take care of all the children. So unfortunately, the underage children all became wards of the state, and they were divided between multiple Catholic orphanages. Now, my father and his sister, his twin, they were in the same orphanage for a little while. But not long after they had been there, his aunt arrived and adopted his sister. And as he tells it, she told him that she already had a boy and did not need one. So my father would live until he was 14 in the orphanage. And he said that he would see his brothers and sisters at school, but they would never again sleep under the same roof. And this is how I became to be raised by a man who, by the time I met him, he didn't really have an identity. He didn't claim one, and he allowed himself most often to be invisible. When he was 18, he then joined the Navy, and in his early 20s, he met my mom in Florida, and they married. Now, he and my mother did not follow the practice of his prolific procreating parents. They just had my brother and I, and we were a small family of 4. But it was so often such a lonely construct, because my mom was estranged from her parents upon marrying my father, and my father did not keep in any kind of contact with his siblings. And you know, we didn't grow up, my brother and I, with seeing biological aunts or uncles or grandparents or cousins. We didn't go to family reunions where there were people that resembled us. We never sat on the floor around our parents' feet and heard them laugh about each other's history or family stories. It just wasn't part of the fabric of how my family was made. Well, it wasn't long after my brother and I were both born and toddlers that my parents decided to move us to a small town in Kentucky, a very rural town in the southern part of Kentucky called Shepherdsville. And my father built our house. And I do believe that this was their attempt to have everything, to create a home that either of them probably felt like they'd ever had, and especially my father. I think he wanted to give us a place, a sense of belonging, a place to call home. Well, little did any of us know at that time that there was a force in that town in the 70s, in the southern part of Kentucky, that was much greater than any other difficulty that my father would have encountered at that point, to actually sense and have a place of home, this very thing he was trying to give us. And ironically, that thing that was causing this was the only thing that he had taken from his birth family, and that was his looks. My father had, as a young man, the most beautiful, sleek coal hair and amber skin that when he was in the sun just got deeper and deeper. And he had high cheekbones and beautiful full lips. And I, as a child, certainly thought he was the most handsome man I had ever seen. Well, apparently, in that part of Kentucky and during that time, the only way you were going to really be in the inner circle was to look like everyone else, to be able to visually assimilate. And the first time I noticed this was going to happen and be true for him was at the bus stop. We had not lived there very long. We had just moved into the house, and my father walked me down to the bus stop, kissed me on my head, and probably gave me some cryptic piece of advice, then turned around and started to walk back for home. And he wasn't very far out of sight when this little girl that I would later know to live across the street in the cul-de-sac from me, and most definitely was the vein of my childhood existence, looked at me and said, "What's your daddy?" I said, "Well, he's my dad." "Well, but what is he?" "Well, he's my dad. He's my dad." And I remember to this day that heat, that rush that comes over you, and I'm sure my face was flushed and I felt embarrassed and anxious and confused as to why I felt ashamed. I thought, well, had my dad done something bad and nobody told me? Was it that people just didn't like him, and did he know that? Then she went on to say, "He doesn't look like you. He doesn't look like anybody." Now, I would love to tell you that that was an isolated incident, but it wasn't. I witnessed it over and over again as a child and through my teen years. Subtle, overt, lots of times where you just didn't know, was it just normal life that was keeping him out of clubs and inner circles and friendships, or was it something deeper, more sinister? So my father, so time went on, and my father, he weathered this pretty well, and he didn't talk much about it. And one of the times that I remember that was most prominent in my mind was when I was in late junior high, and my father wanted to be a deacon at this church that we had gone to for a very long time. And so he put his name into the hat or whatever you do for that. And all the men go into the church and they do their vetting and deciding of who was going to be worthy to play the reindeer games. And all the men came back out. And I remember walking out and seeing my father on the side of the church smoking a cigarette, but he was standing alone. And I knew in my heart, this had not gone right. This had not gone right for him. And later on, my mom told me that the decision had been made and told to him that he didn't represent the flock. I mean, what does that mean? He didn't represent the flock. By that point, I was a teenager, and I was close to teenager, and I had decided I was absolutely not going to stay in that town any more days, nights, weekends, hours that I had to. So although I slept there and lived there on the weekends, I spent most of my time 30 minutes north in Louisville. In fact, so much so that I ended up going to high school there at the Youth Performing Arts School, and I did it by using a fake address. And I used my minister's address, and my minister let me. And I think that was the best thing that's ever come out of organized religion for me. But I feel guilty sometimes because that was the beginning of me finding my own identity, finding my own community and my own culture, the one that my dad couldn't give me no matter how hard he had tried up until that point, that sense of belonging. And I feel guilty because I left him there. I think the adult me today would be like, hey, Dad, let's find your family. Let's get to know these people. Let's find you that right bowling league. Let's find you a community. But you know, back then there was no internet, and I was a kid. We couldn't just Google our way into family history and a sense of belonging. So there is a light, because there should be in all good stories that you want to sit through. As I became an adult, my father he ended up leaving Shepherdsville. He ended up moving to Louisville. He and my mother did divorce, and my father remarried a woman from Guam. And I feel like for the first time ever, that man felt like he had a home. I think he really did. And 2 years into their marriage, my father ironically found out that he had a severe genetic disease, and it was leading to a lung transplant. And ironically, it was so severe because he didn't know that this genetic predisposition was in him, because he didn't have contact with his family. Well, my father did end up getting a lung, and the transplant itself was successful, but a year after it, he started to reject the lung, and we knew that he wasn't going to be with us as long as we had hoped. And by that point, I lived here in Cincinnati, and we had 4 little kids under the age of 7. That whole prolific procreation skipped a generation. And I had a lot of late nights with those little kids, and so I started writing in a green notebook these questions I wanted to ask my dad, things I wanted to ask him about that were simple, like, do you remember what your favorite food was when you were a kid? Or what do you think about opera? I wanted to know things about him. As I said at the beginning, a man of few words. So then more serious things, like, do you remember your mom at all? Do you remember what she looked like? Do you remember her holding you? And I would love to tell you that man just opened up like a book. He did not. But we spent a lot of nights on the phone together talking, and he really, really tried in the last 2 years of his life to let me know more of who he was. He was actually speaking in, paragraphs, not just little sound bites. And at the end of one of those conversations, I said, Dad, wouldn't it be great if we had a family heirloom, something from your side of the family? And he said, yeah, sis, wouldn't that be great? Both of us knowing for him those things just didn't exist. So a few weeks later, I went down to visit him at his house, and he was having trouble with mobility at that point because breathing was quite hard. And he gets up, goes to the back room, he comes out, and he says, hey, I got something to show you. And he held up this. And it's a beautiful tapestry of a Seminole Indian. It's actually called Punch Needle Point. And I was like, wow, Dad, that's really beautiful. Where'd you get it? And he said, I made it. And I can't tell you how shocked I was. One, that's really hard to do. And for any of you guys that needlepoint out there, the back is as pretty as the front. But second thing that shocked me beyond belief was that if you had met my dad, there is no way you would walk away from that encounter going, now there's a man who loves his needlepoint. No. So he gives it to me, and he says, hey, I want you to have this. I want you to remember where you come from. And like most of my encounters with my father, I walked away with a lot of questions. And he did pass probably about a year after he gave that to me. And I've often thought, what inspired him to do that? and I've had to fill in my own blanks. But now I'm a firm believer that that man did all those hundreds of stitches, those thousands and thousands of stitches, because with each drawing of the needle in and out of that canvas, he was stitching back the heritage he had lost. He was recreating a picture for himself that reminded him, and for me, that reminded him that he belonged. He did have culture, he did have community, and he did have a place to call home.
One more time for Carol. By the way, we tallied up about 25 or so of you that participated at the Pin the Tie on the Dad thing and out there. Those of you who put your email addresses on the clipboard, we'll be randomly choosing a few of you to receive some tickets to a future show. Thank you all for participating. We hope you had a lot of fun with that. Thanks, Ramona, for setting that up, and Rob for helping out, and Zach. You all were great. Looked like a lot of fun. All right, our 5th out of 6 storytellers tonight is coming right up. He is an author, a transformational, oh, you know what? This will help. Like, why can't I read all of a sudden? Oh yeah, I wear glasses to read. Our next storyteller is an author, a transformational and spiritual coach and speaker. He has navigated the nonprofit sector by co-founding, founding, and acting as the executive director for various nonprofit organizations. His goal is to lead the leaders and show others how to impact the community and world through kindness, acceptance, and love, which, as you're about to find out, was not his original trajectory. Please welcome Ryan Joseph Allen.
Is hell real? I was hiking in Red River Gorge with my beautiful 7-year-old daughter when she asked me this question. I stopped for a moment, and I just said, "What do you think?" She looked at me in my eyes and said, "Well, I mean, God is love, and if God created all of this beauty and all of this magnificence and this beautiful world, why would he create a hell, or let there be a hell, or let you go to hell?" And I said, "Wow." I said, "You are an enlightened kid. You are woke AF." And it's awesome because she gets to have choices. Things aren't always black and white for her. Me and her mom have done a great job at allowing her to formulate her own thoughts and feelings and opinions on things. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I knew I was way different than the other men around me, than my stepdad or my dad or my brother or my friends that were males. You know, they liked sports and video games. I liked arts and crafts and acting, or even loved the Easy Bake Oven that my mom so graciously purchased for me after I begged her. And in this time, I felt so disconnected from men around me. And I had family that lived in the Deep South, Nashville, Tennessee area, that were Conservative Church of Christ, which if you've not known what that is, you might want to, anyway, make your own opinions. But I always heard these things growing up. For instance, I had a cousin Billy, and they would go and say, "Oh, cousin Billy, pray for cousin Billy." Poor cousin Billy. Billy's going to go to hell. You know Billy's gay. He's going to go to hell. And though at that time, when I was 6 or 7, didn't know that I was in the LGBTQ plus community, by the time I was 8 or 9, I definitely recognized that I was a member. So I thought, oh my goodness, if God hates Billy, God hates me. Even though no one came to me and said, God hates you, that's what I felt because of the conversations that happened around me, the energy that people put towards my cousin Billy. As I got a little bit older, that feeling that I felt from God, from the divine, I'd had a really strong connection since I was really little with God. I could walk into church and I was just on fire. I loved the music and everything. But around that time of 10 years old or so, realizing I was in the LGBTQ plus community, bisexual, but not really knowing all of that at the time, just knowing I wasn't straight like my brother or, like my friends or whatever, I really started self-loathing. I started hating myself because I thought if God hates me, I have to hate me too. So that's when the drugs and alcohol started. I started drinking, using drugs, started self-mutilating, had multiple suicide attempts. By the time I was in college, actually right before college, I met my daughter's mother. We both worked at the airport, and she seemed to like me for me and love me for me. I did come out to her after a few months and said, I'm bisexual or something in the community, I don't know. I had come out to a couple other close friends in the past, but not openly told anybody. She allowed me to continue to date her. We stayed together for a few years, and I moved down to Bowling Green, Kentucky to go to school for meteorology and broadcast journalism. And she came down with me, and she missed her cycle. And so we went to the doctor, and funny enough, the doctor said, well, were you all trying? And we said, absolutely not. She's just, she had just finished college. I was still in college. And the doctor said, well, we're using protection. And we said, well, no. And she said, well, then you were trying. So we jumped in the car, and we both just screamed. We were like, ah! But it was the best blessing of our lives. And in that moment, I was doing drugs every day at that point. And at that moment, I decided, oh my gosh, if I'm going to show up for my child, I'm going to have to stop smoking weed every day and doing drugs and drinking and, hating myself, is what I thought. And that lasted a few months until my daughter was born. Soon after, I was getting into the pain medicine that my daughter's mother had. She had a cesarean section, and got into those and took all those a couple weeks after Harper was born. And then I just fell right back into it, smoking weed every day, and eventually, after a few months, our relationship was not doing well, and I decided that, for one, I had to end the abusive cycles I was stuck in, and two, I needed to come out and be me. So everyone would think, right? You finally get to come out, you get to be yourself, you've wanted this your whole life since you were 3 or 4 and knew you were different, and now you can say, I'm different and I know it, and this is why. Well, yeah, that happened, but it wasn't easy, and it wasn't, I wasn't marching in pride parades. I was marching to the beat of the drum of the drug dealer instead, because I found myself in a hardcore opioid addiction for about 6 months after that point of coming out. And I sat on my way on to class at Northern Kentucky University at the time, because I still had a while left in school. And I sat there as I scrunched up and crushed up the last little Opana I had for the day, savoring it, scrunched it up and snorted it, and sat there in my car for a few minutes before going to class. And a song came on the radio. It was a song by Evanescence called Lost in Paradise. As that song came on, I saw my daughter, as a grown-up, singing me this song. She was broken, she was lost, she was suffering. And it looked like she had felt the way that I had felt my whole life. And then I saw me behind her, almost like it was 2 clouds, and she was in one cloud and I was in the cloud behind her, so I could see her and see the situation. And I saw myself dead, in a ditch, on drugs, in prison. Regardless of the situation, I saw myself not being a dad to my daughter. And in that moment, I decided no hard drugs. I said no drugs at all, actually, especially the hard drugs. Well, that lasted about 12 hours until I was smoking weed again, but I hadn't touched hard drugs since that day. About a month after this situation happened in the car with Evanescence, I was sitting there with my drug dealer. At the time, Harper was about 10 months old or so. Sitting there with my drug dealer in my kitchen, drinking and smoking. And she started sharing with me her faith story. She identified as Christian, had no idea. I was friends with her for 9 months. I actually let her live with me for a while because she didn't have a place to stay. And long story short, she started telling me about God, her version of God, a God that loved and accepted all people. And in that moment, something in my heart broke open. And I felt like I did when I was a little kid, when I was 3 or 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, and I would walk into church and I would feel on fire for the divine, for God, for the Creator. And I said, yeah, I need some time. And so she left. I went to my bathroom. I fell on my knees up against the wall with my hands on the wall and said, God, you have to save my life. I know just because I stopped hard drugs a month ago doesn't mean I'm on the right path, or at least I might be on the path, but I need you to help me get all the way there. So for a few more months, I still lived the same life in many regards, smoking, drinking, partying. And after my daughter was a year old, a little bit after that, I was sitting in the car once again, and God came to me and said, I have your purpose for you, Ryan. First of all, really stop the drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and everything. Eventually, I would even get the message to stop drinking caffeine, which is crazy. Who stops caffeine? Nobody. But I did. God also told me a few other things. He said, your purpose in life is to help people love and accept themselves. But first, you better learn those lessons yourself. He also said it's going to be important that you do community work. A few years later, I'm doing nonprofit work. I help co-found some nonprofits and things like that in the area, all around love and acceptance and kindness, and building bridges and building relationships with each other. But in that moment, he also said, now you can really have the chance to be the dad to your daughter that you always wanted, that you needed as you were growing up. I said, okay. So from that day, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes for at least a month or two. And then we don't use the word relapse in recovery, but I definitely fell off the wagon a few times along the way. But total sobriety now has been over 8 years. Thank you. And the best part about that is getting to be a dad to my daughter. And she's sitting right in front of me, so I'll try not to cry. I'll try not to look at her. Put a blocker up there. But a couple years ago, we were driving on the side of the road, and we often have homeless bags in our car, which are these bags with waters and proteins and a snack or whatever, to hand out to people that might need, a little help. And part of that is that we want to give them something to help them, like physically, but we also want to remind them that they're not alone. So they're really important to do. So we usually have them in the car with us. We don't always have them, but sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We passed a homeless person on the side of the road. And Harper said, do we have any bags in the car? I said, no, we don't have any bags. We have some soda, but I don't want to give them 85-degree soda because it was in the summertime. And so she was like, well, we're giving him this umbrella in our car. It's starting to rain outside. And I said, well, in theory, yes. I said we would give him our umbrella. I said, but we are headed to your soccer practice. It's outside. I'm not trying to get wet. I don't want to do that. And she said, absolutely not, Dad. She unbuckled her seatbelt, put the emergency flashers on, jumped out of that car with that umbrella. As soon as she jumped out of the car, it went from a fine mist to a hard rain. She handed this umbrella to the homeless person, and his face lit up like he had just won the lottery. Harper gets back in the car, with a little tear in her eye, which she never cries. She's like the toughest kid in the world. Way tougher than I ever was. And she gets in the car, and I say, thank you. And she said, thank you for what? And I said, thank you for reminding me that no matter what is going on in our day-to-day life, that we always have something to give. Harper gets to teach me these lessons all the time and reminds me of them. Sometimes she might think she's my biggest cheerleader, but in honesty, I'm blessed to be her cheerleader along the way. I'm so proud of her. 3 years ago, asking questions, those tough questions, is hell real? Finding things out for herself, grasping for her own truth. 2 years ago, at the umbrella distribution of a lifetime. The coolest part about that story, by the way, is that we went, it didn't rain, so I didn't get wet, and a week later we passed that same homeless man, and he was carrying that umbrella. And I'm also thankful for even yesterday, and I'm proud of her, when I asked her 3 times to pick up her room, and she finally did it, I guess, halfway. But regardless, I'm proud of her every day. I wanted to say that I'm so happy and grateful that she gets the chance to have choices that I felt like I didn't get to have. Things weren't always black and white like they were for me. She gets to choose her own destiny, her own belief system, and I'm just there to cheer her along the way. So tonight, I have to say thank you. First of all, to my beautiful daughter, to say thank you to my mom and my partner sitting next to my daughter in between. I need to say thank you to her mother, who co-parents with me, who teaches her kindness and love. I have to say thank you to my divine Father, to Mother Earth, Mother Gaia, for loving me just the way I am, for teaching me that I'm loved and accepted 100% no matter what, and that now I'm able to teach those same lessons to my daughter. And we can't forget Evanescence.
That's awesome. I love it. Evanescence. One more time for Ryan Joseph Allen. If you want to hear more of Ryan's story or read more about it, pick up his book, My Drug Dealer Brought Me to God. Available at big booksellers near you and online. Folks, we have our final storyteller about to come out tonight. He is a trucker who used to occasionally act. His childhood dream was to be on stage. He's been in operas, music videos, commercials. He shared screen time with Oscar winners, and he's made some damn good friends for life, he says, and a few people laugh along the way. He's a proud son, which is about to become quite evident, a proud father, a lucky husband, and owner of the world's greatest dog, which can only mean he hasn't met mine. But most importantly, he hopes to make his mother, Anne, proud tonight. Please welcome Aaron Maas.
Here we go. June 27, 2019, I lost my dad in my arms. And it wasn't one of those quick rip Band-Aid type losses. It was a long, slow, arduous process that had begun 10 years prior to that, when he had a massive heart attack while he was waiting in line at the bank. And they whisked him into emergency quadruple bypass surgery to fight off the cliche infamous widowmaker, which eventually became vascular dementia because they weren't sure how long the frontal lobe of his brain had gone without oxygen while he laid there on floor of the lobby. And the one thing they don't tell you about, they don't warn you about, is afterwards, you know, they tell you about the muscle atrophying, the slurred speech, the potential he may never wake up again, or if he even is going to survive the surgery. But they don't tell you about that quiet, that silence, that deafening absence, that void. And especially with a guy like Dad, who was such a profound individual, just the charisma and the confidence that he exuded, just walking in a room, people, total stranger, would stand up taller around him and speak a little bit softer. He had a 3-piece suit for every day of the month. He had spit-polished wingtips that looked newer than the day he bought them. When he'd be around the employees at his factory or going to church or at restaurants or gas stations, people always had that same reaction to him, the type of guy that he was. But he never came off that he was better than anyone, but you damn sure as hell weren't going to miss or ignore him. And I was never Aaron when I was around him. I was always Steve's boy. And then whenever we were out with my mom and my sisters out and about around town, I was like, oh, there's Steve Maas's family. And even when I was by myself at school and I would see parents picking up their kids, they would see me and say, oh, that's Steve Maas's son. And they would all stand up a little bit taller and speak a little bit softer. And I loved it. I relished it. That somehow my hero instilled this sense of fear in everyone in town, but at the same time, this overwhelming sense of respect for the type of man that he was. And all that was gone. Just that quiet. So the last year of his life, a buddy of mine told me about this true theater thing. And every time you go up on stage, you have a different topic, and this one happened to be about cars. And anyone that's ever met me knows within the first few minutes, I am first and foremost a car guy. And chances are, if our paths ever cross again, I'm going to remember the year, make, model, and color of what you showed up in before I remember your name, which it's by no means braggable. It just happens to be how I'm wired. By default, I have categorized a lot of my friends by their rides, not better or worse, just to help me remember people. I got my friends that have Ferraris, Porsches, Ford, Chevys. I got my Mini Cooper, Subaru friends. Got one of my closest friends, he doesn't even know what type of car he owns. And one of my oldest best friends happens to be an AMC guy. But Dad was a Cadillac man. Dad had a 1978 Coupe de Ville, Columbia blue, 18.5 feet long, 425 cubic inch V8, factory 8-track equipped. It was part of his mystique, part of his aura, you know, it went with the suits. It was a car that brought my baby sister home from the hospital. It was a car that took us back home to Indiana for every Christmas, for every Strassenfest, for every 3-day weekend, for every family road trip. It was a car that my dad sat in the front seat with my mom and he would sing her Beach Boys songs. It was the first car that ever broke my heart the day he traded it in for my mom, a 1988 Buick Century station wagon in maroon. But the greatest memory I have of that car was in the incredibly rare occurrence that he would come home early from that factory. And I would see him coming down the hill. Now, mind you, this was a brand new street, in a brand new neighborhood, in a brand new subdivision, in a brand new house that he personally designed and had built. So that street was as yet unpaved. And as he came down the hill, there'd be huge plumes of dust and gravel flying behind that Detroit goddess chariot. It was like Zeus coming down from Mount Olympus himself to greet us mortals with his presence. And then he would turn right on the Keystone Court. Mind you, Keystone Court, because he was Stephen Maas and it was a brand new neighborhood, they let him name that street. And he decided that he was going to name that street after the state where his son was born, his firstborn. And I was born in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. Hence Keystone Court, still there, Jasper, Indiana, look it up. And he would turn into the semicircle driveway, and as yet unpaved, like I said, brand new, and I could hear the rocks and the gravel crunching underneath those white wall tires. And right as he hit the apex of it, I would fly down the stairs, and I would meet him right there. And to this day, I still don't know how he did it, but in one fluid motion, he would have that door opened with one hand and pick me up, set him on his lap, and close it. And we would sneak away, him and I, go get ice cream. And that was the ice cream car. And I had that Cadillac emblem right there in the steering wheel. And I had it, that big, huge Cadillac hood ornament, about 20 feet away, right there. And I would see the reflection of it on the storefront windows we would drive by, this absolute giant baby blue boat. And I was sitting there driving Dad's chariot, wrinkling that tailored three-piece suit, and everything was perfect, and it was awesome, and it was perfect. So I was thinking about this true car thing. And I've done stage before, I've done movies, I've done commercials, and it was never any really big deal. I mean, because it was never my word, so it was easy, it was fun, you know. How in the hell was I going to go on stage, talk about Dad using my words? So I didn't really put much thought into it, didn't put much, give it a second notion. And then I saw that they were filming it. And the one thing I noticed with that, especially towards the end, the thing that still connected with him, still that resonated with him, that got through, was TV shows and movies that he would watch, especially his favorite movies, be it Animal House, The Blues Brothers, and of course, according to Stephen Maas, the greatest film in American cinematic history, that being Smokey and the Bandit. And you could sit there with Dad in the nursing home and it would be on, and he would start laughing before Jackie Gleason's lines were even delivered. And you could cut up with him, and he was Dad, he was there, he was present. And it was perfect. It was awesome. So I figured, what the hell? I went on stage, I waxed poetic about Dad's caddy, and shortly after that, I started bugging our director, Dave Levy, about the video. I was like, you got the link, you got the video, you got the link, and eventually he did send it to me, and within moments of its arrival, I emailed it, I texted it, I Facebook instant messaged it to Mom. But I waited, a few hours till that evening. And then I started blowing up her phone. Mom, did you get the link? Did the link work? Did you figure out the link? Do you need help with the link? Mom, did you see the video? And 5 or 6, 7 days, whatever it was later, she finally replied back, and I showed your dad the video. I was like, great, did he see it? Did he react? Did he say something? What happened? And she goes, I think he smiled. So fast forward about 4 months after that, and the routine had become wake up, get dressed, get breakfast, get on the motorcycle, and go out to visit Dad. Initially, the visits were about 2.5, 3 hours long, because nobody tells you how long is too long, and no one tells you how short is too short when you're sitting in that god-awful quiet. And occasionally, he would wake up, and he'd look over at me, Aaron! We'd exchange a few words, I'd hug, and within a matter of moments, typically, his eyelids would get heavy, he'd mumble something incoherently and taper off, and he'd be gone again. I was back alone in that silence. Every so often, though, I would get really lucky. I would walk in, he'd be trying to eat, or they would feed him. And he would see me, he would say, Famous! And he had this very specific nickname for me when I was really young. He would call me Famous Amos after the cookie. And then fast forward through the decades, it eventually got condensed to Famous. And then every time he would call me, he'd say, Famous, it's your favorite father calling, like as though caller ID didn't exist. But I would walk in, he would say, Famous, when did you get here? And we'd exchange a few sentences, the hug, and inevitably the heavy eyelids, the incoherent mumbling, and he would drift off. And then the last weekend I visited him. By that point, the visits had shrunk into about an hour, because you can only flip through so many expired magazines. And you get memorized what limited cable channels you have access to in the nursing home. And I developed this nervous tic where I would sit there and just on the remote, just to make noise that changed something. And I remember staring at walls and looking out the window. And then I happened to look over at Dad, and for whatever reason, he was kind of arching his back like that. And he was putting his elbows behind him, and I realized he was trying to sit up forward in the bed. And at this point, all of his superhuman strength had gone. So I jumped up out of my chair, and I grabbed him, and I pinned his arms as tight as I could to ride him, because you don't want to fall out of bed, break an arm, a rib, God knows what else. And he looked at me, but this time when he looked at me, it was different. It was Dad. He was flush. There was color. There was a soul in his eyes. Those steel blue eyes looked at me. And it was that same stern look that whenever one of my report cards came home or another speeding ticket, and he was looking right at me, and the clouds had parted. And out of nowhere, he says, I never liked that goddamn Cadillac. It was the biggest piece of shit I ever owned. And it was the greatest, biggest laugh we'd had in years. And for whatever reason, the next 15, 20 minutes, the Pistons were firing upstairs, and he was there, and he'd found me. And it was perfect. It was perfect. And then 4 days later, I got the phone call. And it was my mom's phone number, but it was someone else's voice. And they said, you need to get here, he's going. And I don't remember going, I mean, I flew out there, I got down into the garage, got on the bike, and I redlined that bitch harder than any machine I've ever pushed in my life. Speed limits did not exist that evening. And my mother tells me I barreled through half a dozen people to get to my dad, and I don't remember that either. But what I do remember is I'm seeing him there, and I put my arms around him, and the hardest, a barrel hug, and I bury my face right into his neck, and I just keep repeating, Dad, it's me, Dad, it's Aaron, I'm here, I love you, Dad, and I just kept repeating it over and over again, and subconsciously I think I was trying to convince him that I could get him to stay. Shortly after that, the nurse called it, and at 7:33 that Thursday evening, Stephen R. Maas was gone. And after that, we had the memorial, and that eulogy was mine. That was my birthright. Nobody was going to get that. But I was panic sweat, losing sleep. I didn't know how I was going to start it. I didn't know how I was going to finish it. I didn't know how I was going to get through it. But I ended up getting through it, and it went way better than I thought it did. And I remember I was standing there at the pulpit of Salem Church in Huntingburg, Indiana, and I saw a lot of my familiar faces, my close friends that had made the trip back to Indiana, and I saw our family there. But what caught my attention was about half a dozen people that I didn't recognize. And I later learned that those were kids that my dad had grown up with, that they hadn't seen him in 50 years. And they thought that much of him that they showed up to pay their respects and say goodbye. And it was at that moment, and also for nights like tonight, that I realized I was never going to stop working on it, and I was never going to finish it.
Aaron Maas. Folks, that's our show. Let's give it up again for all our storytellers. Ron, Joan, Mike, Ryan, Carol, Aaron Bates. All our friends here at Memorial Hall, Annette backstage, everybody helping out with the activities. You all have been great. Thank you at home for the donations that came and are going to come. Hey, folks, we hope to see you at some of our shows later in the season. Remember, April 28th is True Prom. July 28th is True Hobby. Whether we see you out in the lobby now mingling around or at our next show, we hope to see you soon. And until we do, be true. Good night.